Committee of 01 April 2025. I declare this meeting open at 9:01 a.m. A big welcome to our regular committee meetings, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Young, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Castro and Councillor Doran. And, of course, to our visiting councillors, Deputy Mayor Donna Gates and Councillor Fowler, thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that our meetings are open for viewing by the public and our live stream, so we welcome those joining us from home. Item number 1, I do have an apology from Councillor Hammel, who is absent attending other council business. Can I have a seconder to receive that apology? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. If there aren't any objections to receiving Councillor Hammel's apology, I will take the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried. Item 2, leave of absence. There are no requested leaves of absence. Item 3, confirmation of the minutes. So the minutes of 853 meeting held on the 14th of March 2025 are to be confirmed. Do I have a mover for that motion? Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Seconder, Councillor Young. All those in favour? And that is also carried. Item number 4, conflict of interest declarations. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare against any of the items in today's agenda? I'll take that silence as a no. Moving on to item 5, the committee forward planning schedule. So currently the forward planning schedule is our only start item. Yes, Councillor Doran.
Councillor Curtis, I'll be happy to start 6.1 if you're up for it.
No, I think we'll leave that one open. If there's no questions for the forward planning schedule, we'll deal with it as a start item and the only start item. Can I have a mover of that? Thanks, Councillor Wilkinson. Seconded. Councillor Young. All those in favour? And that is carried. So with that, we'll move on to the first presentation for today's agenda, which is item 6.1, the Merrimac Green Organics Pad replacement. And I welcome Chris Owen. Or is it married? Married. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so we've been discussing green organics management at the Merrimac Waste Recycling Centre over the last few months. And as per the March Water, Waste and Energy and Council recommendations, today we're going to present an option to actually replace the green organics pad at Merrimac. So we'll get to the detail of that option in a few slides, but just in terms of background, we constructed the green organics pad at Merrimac back in 2018 on a vacant lot that was owned by the wastewater treatment plant. It was a vacant block and it was earmarked for a future expansion. So we removed, at that time, green organics from roll-on, roll-off bins across the Waste Recycling Centre network to improve operational efficiencies. And I guess at that time, we had the vacant lot at Merrimac, so we built a green organics pad. In terms of other methods of managing green organics provided by the city, we rolled out about 70,000 additional green organics bins in 2023. And I guess just for your information, Division 5 and Division 8 have the highest percentage of curbside customers with a green organics bin. As a consequence of that rollout, the visitation of green organics customers to Merrimac dropped by about 25% last financial year. You'll just see on the top right-hand side of the screen, we've listed the green organics tonnages from 2019 right across the WRC network, and the bottom graph shows the drop in visitation since the green organics bin rollout. Just in terms of current situation, the green organics pad, where it's currently located, is required to be taken over by the STP lot from February next year. Obviously, the STP needs to expand into that site. We've looked at a number of options. We've actually looked at 6 options for replacement of the pad, and we've looked at options both on-site and off-site. So we did outline the options in an appendix to the report. And I guess in terms of off-site locations, they're pretty limited as well due to environmental constraints and also the flooding impacts. So you'll see there on the right hand, the upper image, that's the current layout of the Merrimac Waste Recycling Centre, and the highlighted section is the current green organics pad. That lot will be taken over for the STP expansion in February next year. The lower image is an image supplied by a consultant who assisted us looking at various off-site locations, and as you can see, the majority of that area is prone to flooding, so not suitable for a green organics pad. So just moving on to the actual proposal that we have today. So we have found a location on site in the koala fodder plantation area just adjacent to the entrance as you drive into the site. So we plan on building a raised green organics pad about 6,000 square metres on that lot. It's indicated there in green. So the cost to build that pad is about 4.8 million. I guess the benefits include we won't drop the customer expectations, I guess, and the customer service that we currently offer at that site. And that green waste pad also meets the Q20 flood immunity. In terms of risks, we've outlined the construction costs. They're high costs, 4.8 million, and we're currently assessing what hydraulic offsets will be required. As we continue to plan and develop this concept, we'll also look at the access roads, toll booths, and the stormwater infrastructure that's required for any green waste pad. So just in terms of the time frame, once a decision is made in April, we'll continue the planning, go into detailed plan, and that's where we'll seek our environmental and other types of approvals. So that will happen from April to June. Then from January to February, that's when the STP will actually resume the green organics pad. So there will be a service, there will be a period of about 4 to 5 months where we don't have a green organics pad at Merrimac. So we'll communicate this to our customers and we'll indicate that customers can use Reedy Creek or Mullendiner. And then from July 2026, the new pad will be established and operational at Merrimac. Thank you.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Just a question about the existing pad, first off. How much did that cost to establish?
Through you, Madam Chair, it cost about $500,000 to establish back in 2018.
And why is there, with the $4.8 million, does that include the officer time and the scoping of the roads and tolls? Is that inclusive in that estimate?
Through you, Madam Chair, it doesn't, Councillor. It just includes includes the construction costs for that raised pad. And I guess construction costs have increased quite significantly since 2018, and there's quite a lot of fill that we need to bring into the site to make that a Q20 immunity.
Okay, and once those construction costs are known for the access roads, the toll booth and the stormwater infrastructure, would council get a second go at whether or not to proceed with this pad?
Through you, Madam Chair, we can certainly provide that detail, Councillor.
We have no idea what road, those of us who are not familiar with that area would not at this point have an understanding of what those costs might be and whether it's value for money to actually proceed or not.
Through you, Madam Chair, we're looking at about an additional $1 million.
Okay, thank you. So over a 1% rate rise across the city to deliver this pad, basically.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I'm not sure of you, when you were addressing the flooding implications or the need for this to be raised above flood level, have we conducted full studies of what the afflux might be, what the impacts might be on nearby properties? Or
Through you, Madam Chair, we've used an independent consultant to help us with that, and at the moment they're saying that the impacts are minimal.
thank you. And the koala fodder area, it's quite large. Who has management of that currently, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, so it's owned by the city and it's leased to the Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary. So if we do proceed with the green organics pad, we will liaise with Currumbin Wildlife.
So presumably that material, the fodder, is valuable to them and valuable to the koalas and whatever else they're feeding. Do we have an alternative to provide that in a sustainable way?
Through you, Madam Chair, we said we will look for alternatives for Currumbin.
Would that be on waste, land owned by Gold Coast Water and Waste, or would it be something else that we might have to buy?
Through you, Madam Chair, we'd look for any opportunity for city land, not necessarily wasteland. So, for example, we've got Green Heart and a lot of low-lying areas there which may lend themselves quite well to this that purpose. We have had initial conversations with Currumbin, so it won't be a surprise to them this conversation happening publicly. But we would look for another area where we could effectively put an equivalent site in.
I think it's quite an important aspect of the whole project going forward. And I'd be looking to include, as part of the recommendation to Council, that we have a further report about that koala fodder provision. Do you think that's a reasonable thing?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that's reasonable, and we'd be happy to bring that back and consult with our colleagues in those other areas of the city that could assist us with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
It's been welcome back to edition 4 or 5 of this particular topic. It's been said to me in the previous conversation that there is plenty of koala fodder throughout the city, and this isn't an integral part of the Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary's supply. Do you have any comments around that, or are you suggesting that this is critical to the supply, this particular location?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not aware of that detail, Councillor, but we can certainly look into that and we can detail that in the report that we'll bring back.
Right.
Through you, Madam Chair, this isn't the only koala fodder area for Currumbin Sanctuary in the city that I'm aware of. We had one down near the Eleanor sewage treatment plant. But again, we would prefer, obviously, not to disadvantage Currumbin Sanctuary in the fodder area for this one. So, again, we can certainly bring a report back to Council on alternatives.
When we've discussed this in the past, there's been different reasons brought up along the way as to why it's a good idea to close this facility, and it feels like every time we talk about it there's a new reason to close it. Have you considered in your earlier waste network rationalisation plan that's been referenced before the population growth that is expected in the city, and especially in concert with the Chair of Planning, how they're targeting potential growth in the western suburbs rather than the coastal suburbs, and what sort of impacts do you think that's going to have on the previous desire of city officers' recommendations to close this facility?
Through you, Madam Chair, when we did bring back the waste network plan, we did quite a lot of analysis around growth through an independent consultant. So absolutely, councillor, growth was factored into all our decisions and recommendations. And I guess the driver for us recommending not to replace the pad was data which suggested that drop in visitation by about 25%. So
that drop in visitation is still more than Pimpama. So I'd like to understand why you're not proposing to close Pimpama. In first slide, it had the gross tonnage of Merrimac versus Pimpama, and Merrimac was, I think, over 2,000, just under 2,000 more than Pimpama.
Through you, Madam Chair, Pimpama will be our third premium strategically located waste recycling centre in the city. We expect massive growth in that area, councillor, and in order to alleviate pressure from the Helensvale Waste Recycling Centre, a full waste recycling centre is required at Pimpama.
I appreciate that, Christine, but you just mentioned that one of the reasons for this is that it's at a decline in tonnage, but it's still above Pimpama. And so I feel like if that's the reason, if that's the rationale that some might use to close this, it seems to me to be a weak argument. Were there any other options considered other than the one presented in the report? There were originally 5, I believe, put forward in the first national rationalisation plan. Some of them were a smaller footprint than this one, was there others considered when ultimately arriving at this one? And also, what savings does the city gain from closing this facility in terms of operating budget? Because there's a capital cost, but there's presumably an operating budget saving that you're looking to achieve.
Through you, Madam Chair, we actually looked at 6 options, Councillor. None of those options stacked up in terms of size, environmental approvals, operational logistics, I guess. This is the only option that's available at Merrimac.
And operational, I mean, I know that the current recommendation is city recommendations to do this, but obviously the previous 3 or 4 we've had is to close the facility. And so is there an operational savings that the city is looking to gain, or is it simply trying to avoid the capital cost of reinstating the green pad?
Through you, Madam Chair, the massive saving, I guess, would be not to actually establish, not to spend that 4.8 million. We would see some operational savings, but the majority of that investment is the CapEx outlay.
Last question, Chair. The Deputy Mayor just mentioned a little earlier, referenced the toll booth. My understanding is this is a green organics pad, and there is no future charge on in any capacity on matters we've discussed previously. Is that?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's best practice, and I guess it's good practice to have control points at all of our facilities, and that's something that we're looking to establish. We also want to collect data. So a toll booth would help in establishing that sort of operational improvement.
And through you, Madam Chair, I think toll booth is probably the wrong terminology. It might be a gatehouse would be the better term. So there is not a toll involved. It's just those other functions. For example, at Merrimac at the moment, we have an officer standing in the middle of the road, effectively under an umbrella at times, with a gatehouse. We could hook it into our weighbridge system. There's no weighbridge there, but the software can count cars, record the different sorts of vehicles that are coming in, and just control that a lot better. And also, just from a health and safety point of view, for the officer there, it's a better environment for them to be working in.
Councillor Castro.
Thank you. Mary, just one question. In relation to the 81% green waste for Division 8 and Division 5 for the bins, what are the percentages for the other divisions out of interest? You know, what is the closest to Division 8 and Division 5, for instance?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we did provide that information in the Waste Network Plan, Councillor, but I can provide it again.
Yeah, I think we did. I think they were all pretty similar, but I just wanted to know what it was. So there were a few things that weren't in this report that were in earlier reports, but as you say, the recommendation there is for approval, but there are some important points in those other reports, and I'll have to obviously find those in case needed. Hopefully that won't be the case, but that was. I think that was it from a question point of view, and and once there aren't any more questions, I'd be quite happy to move the recommendation.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Young.
So we've identified a cost for this, and the recommendation is that we incorporate that within the budget deliberations. Am I right in thinking that all of these costs would have to be recovered through the waste management charge? And what is the likely impact per rateable property? Do we know that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that's correct, Councillor. Any costs, I guess, allocated to the business would need to be assigned to the business, and we'd need to recover that.
And through you, Madam Chair, it's not necessarily a cost that would hit our bottom line in the first year. This would be spread across a number of years, would pull us out of either reserve funding or loan funding. So we wouldn't necessarily be talking about a $4.5 million transfer across to rates in that first year.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm a little confused by the recommendation from the officers, given the previous information provided to us. And I note that Council basically endorsed the progression of a permanent organics pad at Merrimac and requested that this report come forward. But this is an officer recommendation, so have the officers now decided that this makes sense, or is it purely based on the decision made by Council before we had the information about cost that is included in this report?
If you'd like to.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, this is based on the recommendation and decision by Council previously to bring forward a report and to proceed with the planning of a go pad at Merrimac, and so that's why we've presented what we consider to be the most viable option of the options that were explored.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no further questions, I think I have a mover in Councillor Castro for the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Dorrant, and I will allow Councillor Castro to open debate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, as I say, there are a few things in the other 2 or 3 reports that aren't in here. But look, the bottom line is, when the questions were asked earlier on with earlier debates as to if we didn't need that land for the expansion of the water treatment plant, would there be a recommendation to close this site? And the answer was no, for the simple reason it ticked every box. And I pointed this out through debate. So we keep getting the same questions, the same old chestnuts coming up, with the questions. Every time this matter comes before us, it ticks every box in the sense that it's well patronised, it's needed. We had the temporary site. Supposedly 7 years is not temporary. Very hard to take something away when it's being so well patronised after 7 years. So we know it's being used. Yes, 81% of people have green waste bins, but as I say, if you look at those numbers across the city, they're very, very similar. The other thing that I wanted to point out here was, and it's something that Councillor Doran touched on with the operational costs. In one of those earlier reports, we looked at the operational costs of this particular site compared to others, and it was one of the lowest from an operations point of view. And I actually argued, well, why are we not looking to close this one or this one? I think it was lower than Mollendina. I know there was Jacobs Well was another one that was in there. Just purely from an operational point of view, so that isn't an issue. The other thing I wanted to point out in the report, it talks about the 25% reduction, and we've got a table in here about green organics disposal trends across the network. And it's quite interesting because if you actually look at 21-22 through to 22-23, Stapleton actually had a reduction of about 28%. If you actually look at Mollendina, if you do the numbers from 21 to 22 to 22-23, Stapleton actually had, Mollendina actually had a drop of just over 23%. So we've got one at 28%, we've got one at 23, and ours is 25. And again, it's, and I know this report is recommending that we go ahead with it, but I've always said in the past, it's a bit like the media. It's not what the media writes that causes the problems, it's what they leave out. And it's the same here. It's actually, we pick a figure out and we say, well, okay, they've got 81% green bins in the area. They've had a 25% reduction, but it leaves out what the reduction has been in other areas, so we can actually look at this. This is similar. This isn't just Merrimac. But the other thing is you'll actually see there's a big spike. So before anyone jumps on it and says, yeah, Bob, but there's a big spike between 22-23 and 23-24. Well, of course, we have the Christmas Day, New Year storms at the end of 23, beginning of 24, and if you actually look at the areas in the north in particular, there was a massive spike because of that, because it had massive consequences around the city. Division 8 was basically left pretty much untouched. You know, it really didn't cop it at all. But interestingly, with the recent extreme weather event, as you would have seen in the last report that came to, or the last briefing we actually had to council, and there was an email sent around by Chris as well, that Merrimac had to be, you know, it was diverting traffic. Yeah, we had to divert them because there was something like 1,800 a day. I think we had, just under 2,000. Funnily enough, I went to drop off a third load of green waste just from my garden. I had 3, back seats down, 3 car loads. I encourage people to plant a lot of trees, and there were a lot of trees in the area. And I really wonder if there are still those who are looking to close this down, whether we should be promoting to green the city and get people to plant trees in their gardens if they can't dispose of it without having a 1-hour round trip to go to the closest site. So that just shows you there's a lot of greenery, and this time we got hit. We got hit harder than a lot of other areas, so that is why there was a big spike there. So that they are going to fluctuate depending on what areas get hit in storms and what areas don't. So I just wanted to point that out. Coming back to the koala fodder, absolutely, that's important. Okay, we've got them all over, and we could say, yeah, we've got enough anyway. But the Green Heart has 247 bloody hectares. 247 hectares. That is a lot of land, and if you can't find some land to put some koala fodder there's something wrong. So that's not an issue. That doesn't even come into play. Plenty of places for the koala fodder. So that I just wanted to put that argument to bed as well. All the way through, and again, I just want to reiterate, all the way through, I've supported the expansion of the water treatment plant, the treatment plant, because it's critical, it's imperative, it's critical infrastructure, has to be done. And I just wanted that on the record. I know Councillor Doran has been in the media actually pouring cold water on any thought that either one of us had ever tried to hold anything up. We haven't. Not once will you find anything, if you go through all the debates, everything's recorded, not once have either of us ever spoken about slowing that down or in any way. We accept the fact that there will be a lag here. There may be a 4 or 5 month period where there isn't a green waste site. But waste disposal, whether it's whatever type of waste it is a frontline service. This council made a commitment that we would not close frontline services, and disposal of waste is a frontline service. And there is no other reason that was recommended to actually close down this green waste pad. As I say, it ticked every single box, except for the fact that we needed that land for the expansion of the treatment plant. So now we've got a site. Again, ticks all the boxes. We knew those figures before. Those figures were in the other reports. And as I say, I've supported, and I know Councillor Doran has supported all the way through the expansion to the site. This is something, I've given you enough information to tell you that there is no reason for anyone who's still thinking this site needs to be closed. And just certainly in the last couple of weeks, it gives you every reason to understand why we need this facility. So I'm asking councillors to support this. That was the result of the last round of meetings to progress this. There is a need, and it's not just Division 8 that this services. It services a lot of people in Div 11. It also, I know Councillor Marshall has a lot of residents who use this. Councillor Taylor, this is certainly where I know he's very supportive of this because it really impacts on his division as well. And I know that Councillor Tozer, even though he didn't originally support it, he actually moved the last motion for it because it actually affects some of his division too. So it's 5 divisions that this actually affects. It's not just Division 8. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Castro. Would anybody like to speak against the recommendation? Councillor Young.
I don't want to speak against it, but I'd like to move an amendment, please, Chair. So it's the existing 1 and 2 with an additional number 3, which is, if I can read it, that a further report be brought forward addressing the continued provision of koala fodder to alleviate any shortfall that might arise through the loss of the existing plantation at Merrimac. I'll take those words to the Minutes Secretary, but I'll speak to it briefly. No contest from me about going ahead with the facility at Merrimac, the green organics pad. I hope you can read that. Thank you. And I do accept that there's probably a lot of land at Greenheart that can accommodate a fodder plantation, but I just want to make sure that we're ticking that box so we get a report that informs us of when and where and how that can be provided, because I think that's an essential part of the entire equation. As I say, no contest with the motion that's before us, but just wanting to get that additional provision. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Young. So we're now dealing with an amended motion that is finding its completion on the screen now. I'll take that as a speaker for. Yes, Councillor Doran. Absolutely.
Through your chair to Councillor Young. Councillor Young, are you looking to tie any outcome in point 3 to the progressions of point 1 and 2, or simply to come back with an alternative location?
No, that's a separate report which would just address that re-provision, you might say. So it's saying, okay, go ahead with 1 and 2, but because we're acknowledging the loss of the fodder plantation, let's ensure we get a report that addresses how that's going to be dealt with in the future.
If the move of the motion's comfortable with that additional part of the amendment, I'll take that as another speaker for the recommendation.
But again, if Councillor Young wants to move that as a separate motion, I'm happy to incorporate that based on what Councillor Young has just said. But if Councillor Young would rather move it himself, that's fine too. If you want to move it as your motion rather than...
I just wanted it to be an amendment. That's just to add number 3.
So added, you mean you're happy for me to move it and Councillor Doran to second, or you want to move that amendment? Or do you want
I'll
us
move
to...
that amendment if you'd like to second it.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to do that.
Okay, so
it's
now...
not a change recommendation, it's an
Sorry,
amendment.
yeah, it's amended. It's an amendment, not a
Thank
change
you for
recommendation.
typing it up.
So the amendment stays moved by the original mover, is that correct? And then we vote on...
The mover
just need some
of the original
procedural
motion
assistance.
will get the right of reply.
I beg your pardon?
It closes debate.
Who will close debate?
I will still
mover.
You still
close
okay,
debate,
yeah,
but
okay.
this is now Councillor Young's motion. Yeah. The amendment is, it hasn't been incorporated. It's not me accepting it and saying, yes, I'll include it, and I'm still the mover. Councillor Young is the mover. I'm now the seconder, but because I moved the original motion, it comes back to me to close the debate. I know it's really bizarre, really, but that's the way it works.
If you prefer to include that in your original motion, I'm happy with that, Bob. So you're seen as the mover. That's fine.
So thank you for your patience. Could we please include that in the original recommendation as moved by Councillor Castro and seconded by Councillor Doran? They've accepted the thoughtful addition from Councillor Young, and so we still are debating that that first one with the slight wording amendment. We've had 2 speakers for, and so is there anyone that wishes to speak against the recommendation as it's on the screen now? No? Okay, before I throw back to Councillor Lacastra to close. I do want to acknowledge that this is the result of a previous council resolution for which I'm very respectful of that process. However, so I will not be recommending an alternative recommendation through today's committee, but as I won't be supporting the recommendation, I will just provide my reasoning. Once the pad at Merrimac is closed for a period yet to be determined, but for a period of four-ish months, is that where we're landing? We will have essentially achieved a rationalised strategic network of GoPads where we have activations in the south, central and northern areas that are geographically dispersed, creating an even distribution of those assets and an equity of service for our ratepayers. When we reintroduce a green pad at Merrimac at a cost of $4.8 million for all ratepayers, with an additional $1 million potentially in add-ons after that, we will essentially have disrupted that rationalisation and created a gaping hole in the central north. When my residents come and ask me why I would have supported the higher activation of what we've described as frontline services that denigrate the level of service available to them and the distance that they need to travel, I won't have a sound piece of reasoning to provide them. I also am not overly motivated to propose the addition of a green pad for the central north, because I think that we've seen some incredible efficiencies in our services with the introduction of the green bins, and I'm incredibly proud to lead a community that are one of the highest presentation rates of green bids across the city, and I think that's achieving some great efficiencies in our system, and so it's not something that I seek to disrupt. But ultimately, I won't be able to support an outcome that provides disproportionately less services across the network for my area at such a high cost to all ratepayers. So I will now throw to Councillor Castro to close debate.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, I think I've already outlined everything, and look, for me, as I say, it's this is not a simple matter of okay, you can get there in 20 minutes. You can't get to Reedy Creek in 20 minutes from a lot of places in my division, particularly on certain times of day. But as I say, it's a 1 hour round trip minimum. If you've got one load, and if you've got 2 or 3 loads, as I say, like I had this time, and a couple of times a year without storms, I have 3 car loads that I take. That means you've got 3 trips, and you can't have people spending 2-3 hours on the road trying to drop off their green waste, because they won't. They'll just drop it somewhere on the road. It's very well utilised, as I say, and I think the recent storms showed that. Look, as I say, and more than happy to incorporate this number 3 in the motion. A big fan of koala fodder. I think every one of us is, and as I say, there isn't going to be any problem with finding somewhere for the koala fodder. There are, we can grow, I don't know, scores of hectares of it if we want to on the Greenheart. So on the Greenheart site, and I'm sure there are other sites too. But look, councillors, no, I'll leave it at that. I think I've debated everything. I've mentioned everything in the debate before, so I don't need to reiterate anything else. And I'll close and hopefully get the majority support.
Thanks, Councillor Castro. And with that, debate is closed. I'll now take the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation: Councillor Young, Councillor Castro and Councillor Doran. All those opposed: Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Patterson and Councillor Curtis. The vote is tied, which gives me the casting vote, and I will stick with my vote, which means that the recommendation is not carried. I'll take a brief adjournment for 5 minutes. Thanks. We're returning from a brief adjournment after we were left without a recommendation. To keep matters extremely simple, the new recommendation on the screen is that Council does not endorse the option of a new green organics pad at Merrimac WRC. I will move that motion. Question, Councillor Doran.
Chair, that's in direct contradiction to the Merrill minute that's sitting here on the table at the moment.
Yep.
How are we looking to resolve the two matters?
It's my position that the previous one is also in direct conflict with the Merrill minute, was that there was to be no closures and there was always going to be a closure with the previous one. So the comfort level of not addressing the Merrill minute was already tied up in the original recommendation, and I think that's something that can be fleshed out at full council.
So the Merrill minute, as I understand it, leaves everything open, and so now we're saying we're closing it. So I guess this is a new one for me. I maybe through you, Chair, because I think we're making it up as we go. But what does the Deputy Mayor say in terms of the hierarchy of a committee recommendation versus the Merrill minute?
I believe that every new council resolution overtakes any previous resolution. So I believe it's. I have to say, I don't know that this is the right process, having no foreshadowed motion and the last motion being lost. I don't know if you can revisit and do this, but I'm sure that we took some advice during the break.
Did we?
Well, that was my understanding, is that we require a recommendation, or can we just leave it as it was lost and there is no recommend? Like, happy for guidance. I'm certainly not the subject matter expert.
My apologies. I thought that's what you were discussing during the break. Whether this can be now presented when nothing was foreshadowed.
It could be done as a general business.
Oh, need 2 days notice though.
But my understanding of the resolution process is that a new resolution of council replaces a former resolution of council.
Understood. And just to clarify, Deputy Mayor, so my understanding of meeting rules would be we would delete this entire new section, move on to the next item, and this is something that would need to be resolved at full council?
I actually believe we should take a break and contact General Counsel.
And I will take that recommendation. So we will adjourn again for a period of time until we can ratify the correct process. Thank you. return live streaming. Unfortunately, we weren't able to confirm with General Counsel the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave the item as lost and move on to a presentation 6.2. If we receive any advice to the contrary of that process between now and the end of the meeting, we'll seek to rectify our actions. Otherwise, it will simply be a non-recommendation or a recommendation that lapsed without a foreshadowed motion on the screen. So with never a dull moment in WWE. Moving on to item 6.2, which is third time's a charm for a presentation on our food organics trial for multi-unit dwellings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to introduce Tony Lee. She's going to present today on the high-rise residential food organics recycling. Tony is the Senior Project Officer who looks after these programs. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you one of the activities we're doing or that we've just finished doing to try and understand how we better service our high-rise community and how we address one of our priority waste streams, which is organics. Let me just get this right. Oh, there we go. So as you're aware, organics is a priority waste stream, not just for the local government, but also for our federal and state governments as well. In our recent Towards Zero Waste plan, it was called out as a separate action because it's such a priority to divert this material from landfill. And in keeping with that, we know that in the future, when we go to manage this material, it is included as part of what the ARC will look after for us in the future. Now, the residential organics comes from single unit dwellings, so our freestanding homes, and also comes from medium and high-rise density dwellings. Now, medium density dwellings are things like units, apartments, semi-detached dwellings, and duplexes, for example. And then we have our high-rise density dwellings, which are when you're looking at 4 stories and above. Now, in partnership with DETSI, the Department of Science, Tourism and Innovation, we received some funding to run a high-rise trial, a high-rise medium density trial to divert that material, food organics, from landfill. Now you can see here that this is from our 2022 waste audit, that in our single unit dwellings or our wheelie bins, most of that material was garden organics. Now since we've rolled out the green organics bin, that's dropped down to around 14%, from 27 down to 14%, and we still have food in that waste bin. And for our medium and high density dwellings, most of the organic material is actually food, which is one of the reasons we've just focused on food organics for this dwelling type. Now, for our single unit dwellings or our wheelie bins, for example, we have our Go bin, which is available, mandated for single unit dwellings between 250 and 5,000 square metres. We have the opt-in green organics bin for all other dwellings. So if someone wants to have it, they can opt in for it. We also have our green organics drop and goes and home composting available. However, for our medium to high density dwellings, the only options at the moment for them in regards to organics is really the drop and goes, but we know they don't really need a lot of that use, and then home composting. So the trial that we ran went from May to October of 2024, and it was an opt-in trial. So that meant that both the building that was involved and the residents that participated had to sign up a form to participate. And as part of that, it was to understand what the interest and level of commitment there would be to this kind of service. Those people who signed up used a caddy and a caddy liner, and as you can see in the Let's Get Started collateral piece that's shown up there, people used that caddy, collected their food in it, and then they would take it down to a larger collection bin that was down in their bin storage area, and generally that was down at the bottom where their general waste and recycling bins were. We chose a large-scale engagement method, which meant that we tried to implement something that could be scaled up. So if we were to roll this service out across the city, how could we do this and get connection with our customers and our residents. So that meant we used things like emails, social media posts, those kinds of things. We weren't doing face-to-face connection with these residents. We did pre, mid and post-trial surveys to both understand people's interest in the service, how they were behaving throughout the trial and whether they would take up that service at the end. The wheelie bins were used for the service collection, and we had our JJ's waste collections contractor collecting that material as part of the commercial food organic service, and then it was processed by Phoenix, who also process our commercial food organics. What were the outcomes? So we had 7 buildings that did choose to participate. However, we had low opt-in participation. Other trials that have run in other parts of the country, such as City of Sydney, they had up to 33% opt-in participation. And as you can see there, we had a range from as low as 3% up to as high as that 97%. Now, to let you know, the one that had the high percentage of uptake, the building manager went to every single resident and pretty much made them sign the form to participate. He was very keen, but that's what it took, was the building manager to go around to each of those residents. Now, that participation didn't change over time. We offered additional incentives, financial incentives, to encourage people to participate, but it didn't move the needle at all. Now, we did have the participants that were in the trial were motivated and diverted material, about 1.95 kilos per household, which is quite reasonable. Most of the material diverted was loose food, so vegetable peelings, fruit peelings, that kind of thing. Not a lot of stuff that came in containers. And the total food organics from those 7 buildings over that 6 months was 4.3 tonnes. And as you can see down the bottom at the end of the trial, do you agree with the statement, I would use a food organics recycling service in the future? Most of them said yes. What were the outcomes? So we did see a reduction in food organics in the general waste stream, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner of that graph that you can see, from 36% down to 29%. Now, that's a very good outcome considering we had such low participation. There was confidence in food diversion as time went on with the trial, but unfortunately that did lead to an increase in contamination. Most of the contamination was food containers, so it means that people were still trying to do the right thing. They weren't putting things in there that they obviously knew they shouldn't. We had a successful inclusion in our current commercial food organic service, so there was no change to that service for our waste collections contractor, and there was no change to that service for our processor as well. And the motivation to participate pretty much stayed the same throughout the trial. For our property managers, it was also very a good experience for them as well. They felt supported by the city. They had all the material that they needed to roll out this service, and there was no issues with having that bin, that food organics bin, in with their other waste bins. What are some of the learnings that we got from this? So the service perception and understanding will influence the service uptake. Originally, we did have an 8th building that wanted to participate, but they wanted 100% guarantee that there would be no odour and there would be no other issues from having that bin. And of course, even with a general waste bin, you cannot give that guarantee, and so they decided not to participate. Additionally, we had opt-in participation by residents wasn't high, and at this stage that's our probably general reflection of what we would expect from across the board from other buildings as well. We must have buy-in from the property manager. If we can't get them on board, we cannot roll out a successful service, because they will need to engage and allow us to engage, whether it's through their social media pages or via emails and things like that, to engage with the residents. Once established, the traditional collection service ran very smoothly and there were no issues, and ongoing education and engagement is essential to ensure we keep that contamination low. We know for organics, contamination is essential to keep as low as possible. In the organics action plan, we know that they're trying to achieve a less than 1% contamination rate for organics. What are our next steps? So we would like to run another trial which is in 25-26, but this one will be an opt-out trial. So we would like to try and see if people are told that they must do it, that we get a higher participation rate and higher diversion. We saw a similar thing, for example, with the green organic spin. We had an opt-in for a long time and we hit a certain level, a plateau, and then once we've mandated it, we've seen that uptake and that participation rate stay the same, and we've seen that increase in tonnage diversion. We'll be looking at mixed dwellings now, so rather than just dwellings, we will look at potentially looking at some short-term accommodation as well. This one will be a 12-month trial and it will be funded. We're currently waiting for state government funding to come through for that, so we're expecting that hopefully by the end of this month. We'll be using the learnings from the 24 and 25 trial to inform a business case, which will look at how we can roll out a larger scale service to offer a food organics service for this community group, so for the high-rise dwellings, for example. And that's where we're at with our next steps for organics.
Thanks, Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. Got a few questions. Thanks for the presentation. So the liners were provided to the customers. What are they?
So through the Chair, they're compostable bin liners, so that means they can go to the organics processor and be broken down with the other material, of course. So those liners were used in the caddy, so people would have the caddy in their kitchen, under their kitchen bench, anything like that. Then they would tie up the liner and take that down to the collection bin down in the bin storage area. They're usually used to help with odour, a convenience for our residents. Generally, it's a tidier thing. They're used to putting material into a bag and as a transportation tool.
So you can buy them at a supermarket kind of thing?
You can. In this instance, we provided the liners. One of the issues with liners is if they're not provided, residents may mistakenly purchase the incorrect liners that are biodegradable and aren't actually suitable for the processor. So that's why we provided them and didn't give them an option of where they could get them.
And what sort of incentives were offered to customers?
Through the Chair, we offered financial incentives actually. So in the first instance, it was just, or in both instances, it was just a debit card, like a Visa debit card for them to use initially, and then we offered a further one which was $250 in the second round. So the first time was $500, the second time was $250.
Right. So people understand what the end product is. They know it gets processed and becomes garden mulch or a high quality product like that.
So through the Chair, the surveys that we conducted demonstrated that initially people weren't as aware, but by the end of the trial they were more aware. And
so that's not part of the initial education.
So through the Chair, so we did give initial information as to what would happen to it, but sometimes people's understanding didn't occur until after they'd participated in the trial and understood what was happening.
Has there been any thought about providing the mulch product back to the clients? For example, if in the unit complex where you've got 30 units participating and they're providing about 2 kilograms each of food waste, I don't know what that converts to in terms of mulch product, but it's probably more than 2 kilograms per because it's got to be mixed with other stuff. So it could be effectively that unit block could have got 60 or 80 kilograms of mulch per week, which might make a difference to their kind of perception of how good this process is.
Through the Chair, we actually had one of the Atlantis buildings that wanted to do that initially, but given the material of where it was going and getting it back to the gardens for what they wanted to use, it wasn't substantial enough for them to take the material in the end. But that's certainly something we could look at in the future as an incentive for people to participate. Additionally, some of these buildings, the Atlantis buildings, had definitely plenty of garden space to take that material. Some of the other buildings, like Condor, for example, was just complete concrete, and so it would not be of any benefit to that particular building, but it's something we could investigate.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest that we investigate that a bit further. It may not be able to be used in that garden there, but there's a park across the road, and if everybody knows, look, that's our product going into there to revitalise those public gardens or something.
Absolutely.
It's a good lesson. Thanks very much, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Gates, then Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. The bags, the recyclable or composting bags, what is the cost of those bags? And I'm asking this question because of our the animal control area and the huge number of bags that we pay for, 1.2 million a year, I think, from memory. 12 million a year. 12 million a year. And I know that we as a council have expressed an interest in moving to biodegradable bags in that area, and I think, and correct me again if I'm wrong, but I think the cost was like 13 cents per bag. 37. So, I mean, I'm interested in this and what the benefits to the city are, because at the moment all I can see is additional cost that is going to have to be recovered through the waste levy. So, you know, it's a great idea, but for our ratepayers, I believe we need to know those things before we head down a path where it's not sustainable due to cost.
Sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, I think that's a really good point, Councillor. Part of the intent of these trials is to get a fix on what actually happens. So if you look at the costs of these bags, these are compostable bags. They're not biodegradable bags. They're quite different. Right. And for this part, we really wanted to take that variability out of the trial, if you like. It's more about how our customers behave and what this actually offers. So if you look at the tonnage that was recovered, it's not really substantial. But if you look at then the way the Gold Coast is moving and it stands now, the portion of our customers in this sort of building, this sort of residential building, means that we really need to look at that cohort and understand if it is worth actually chasing down organics, because there's an opportunity cost to this. So, for example, with our 70,000 green organics wheelie bins, we got an enormous bang for buck with that in terms of the material that we were diverting away from our landfill and extending our landfill life. So I think what these trials actually determine is exactly what you're pointing out now. If we were to come up with a model as part of that business case, what would be the cost if we were to supply these bags? What would be the cost if we didn't? So, for example, if we move this material to a processor like Phoenix Power that we did these ones, they'll actually put a premium per tonne if this at certain amounts of contamination. So if those bags are the wrong bags, they're biodegradable bags rather than compostable bags, and this is where it gets really hard for our customers to get their minds around, that's actually contamination at that point, and that comes at a cost and can even reduce the ability for us to process that. So these trials are really helpful to understand the problems, the tonnages, the behaviour and the attitudes of customers that we're dealing with. And it may well be we get to the end of these and say, in terms of bang for buck and costs and what we're trying to offset here by diverting stuff away from landfill, we may well be better at holding fire and looking for a waste to energy solution for this one.
Thank you. And I was out the back. Was it suggested that this is only for medium density dwellings while I was out the back?
Through the Chair, this trial was for medium density and high density dwellings. So generally dwellings that had bulk bins, for example, so not your wheelie bins that you have, but those bulk bins.
Right.
Yes.
Because 4 bins is kind of untenable for our residential areas, so that's not envisaged at any time.
Through the Chair, no, for our single unit dwellings or people who have their own standard bin set, I suppose, their general waste recycling, and they have their own set, this trial and what we did here, a food organics only stream isn't proposed for that at this point. This is only for those bulk bin customers who, and when I showed you before the percentage of material, this is for those customers where mainly it's food that's the organic material that's in their waste bin, not garden organics.
Okay, thank you.
I'd Councillor Martin and Councillor Patterson.
Thanks, Chair. Just interested in the Burleigh Heads opt-out trial. So just wondering why that's not an opt-in, and if you can just talk me through. So this is a mandatory, so those residents will be forced to do this trial. Is that correct?
So through the chair, what we're looking at with this trial is we will approach buildings to participate. So we're not going to the buildings and saying you must, but we will be asking them to offer it as an opt-out trial. So that means if someone doesn't want to participate in that building, they may complete a form and say, I choose not to participate in this trial. So really, they're opting in or out, but then we're really trying to make it a little bit harder for people to opt out, because the opt-in version showed that we had very low participation from that. And so, like I said, the only one that we really got high participation was when the building manager went around and knocked on the doors of every resident in his building and got them to participate in the trial. And we got very good results from that building. So we want to see if we can replicate that and what kind of diversion we'd get, and also what the contamination would be from an opt-in versus an opt-out service. So we know what we will be looking at, and that would inform that next level of service planning.
Chair, just to follow on. So can you tell me how Burleigh Heads was identified as the best location for the trial?
So, through the chair, so what we're looking at is to try and look at a different kind of residential area, different to Surfers Paradise, Main Beach and Broad Beach, which is where this was conducted, this first trial. So we're trying to look at somewhere different that maybe the opt-in rate was quite low. So we're hoping or looking to see whether Burleigh may be a little bit more open to participating in a trial like that, and seeing what the comparison is between the residents, or whether it's consistent irrespective of where we conduct the trials.
And through you, Madam Chair, can I just add to that whether they opt in or opt out is actually an exercise in itself. So if we find that we just cannot get any buildings that will sign up, that's a finding in itself. Part of what we're trying to achieve here is state government policy is proceeding, and one of the streams that are priority for the state government are organics. But what's helpful for us is when we're engaging with state governments in terms of the direction they're going with this sort of policy. If they put, for example, a mandate on us offering this sort of service in high-rise, as part of the consultation on that, we're in a better position to say, we've run a trial, you've co-funded the trial, and here are the findings. Do you really want to go down this path, or is there better opportunity in other areas as well? So although it sounds a little odd, we are looking for those, a number of buildings that are like that 97%. Will we get them? I'm not convinced we'll get the large numbers we got in the opt-in trial. But that in itself will be an interesting finding. And we may well have to put a sealer to say if 80% is all right or 75%, we're never going to get 100% because we certainly, there's no head of power within us or necessarily that body corporate to enforce this if people generally don't want to participate.
Final question, Chair. Thank you. Obviously Burleigh Heads right now has had significant impacts. Light rail stage 3 works are underway, and it's directly already impacted the bulk bin collections. We've got adjusted times, earlier times, which has caused a lot of ruckus with residents because they're getting unusually early collections, and it is a community that's greatly impacted by that light rail construction, which had been approved. So I'm just wondering whether that's been considered about the changes to the waste collection already, and perhaps how those residents of those high-rises are going to deal with this, given so much construction impacts have already and are still ongoing at this time. Is that really the right location?
Through the chair, that's a fair observation. We're all acutely aware of the complexities of waste collection down there at Burleigh Heads with that construction. And I guess I'd ask Tony, are we locked in with our state government funding to Burleigh, or have we got flexibility there? Because we would certainly rethink that and look at a different area that would give us a representative sample. And again, that's part of the reason, as Tony suggested, around going down to Burleigh, just to get a representative sample of different parts of the city, which may or may not behave differently. But I'll hand to you, Tony, in terms of flexibility, if we could move further south potentially or further north.
Through the chair, we're not tied into that location. We're able to be flexible with that, and the intent, exactly as Chris has suggested, is to try and get a representation and not just base it on a single location that's currently convenient for our commercial food organics collection service. So we really want to try and go, we've tried different areas of the city, and that was just a good example. Sort of going south is more logical than going north.
I've got Councillor Patterson, then Wilkinson, then Councillor Doran.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Couple of questions. First one, so with that table on page 43, so my understanding would be that even though the percentage of food organics is lower for the single unit dwellings or the low density dwellings, it would be probably the same amount overall, right? It's just that they've also got the green waste, which is increasing that. I mean, you're not going to eat more food for the same, for 2 people in a unit, for 2 people in a house. Is that right?
So through the chair, and if I've misunderstood you, please let me know. In terms of tonnage that's available in the single unit dwellings, we have about 30,000 tonnes of food organics that we could take out if we had a FOGO service, for example. And in our multi-unit dwellings, we have about 18,000 tonnes. But what that is reflective of is the number of dwellings, for example. But we do know that medium to high density is starting to increase. We're already at about 46% across the city of those dwellings, and we know that that's going to grow.
Sorry, 46% of, what's the 46%?
About of our medium to high density dwellings as opposed to our single unit dwellings, for example.
Right, so 46% of our total dwellings are in that. Okay.
Yeah.
So my question really is the food use for, say, a family of 4 in a unit versus a house isn't going to be different. It's just, it looks lower because there's also the green waste. We've got a percentage here. What we don't actually have is the numbers, which would probably answer my question. So that's the first thing, right? We're not seeing a difference in food use. No. Okay. So why are we not taking a similar option with houses?
Through the chair. So this was just a trial to understand what we could do to offer the medium to high density dwellings. We don't really offer that community group a range of services like we do with our single unit dwellings through the green organics bin. So they're an area that we do need to address because they still do have a substantial amount of material that we could pull from the high rises. So that's about, like I said, 18,000 tonnes that are available for food organics from that area. For our single unit dwellings, we just rolled out the green organics bin. And across the country, generally people are rolling out a FOGO service. But at the moment, in Queensland, rolling out a FOGO service is currently sort of on hold at the moment. Food organics, garden organics, my apologies. So where you put food and garden organic material into the same bin.
Yeah. So that's not the case at the moment, right? So my green organics bin, because I was thinking, am I missing something? So I'm just putting green waste in my green bin.
That's right.
Right. So we're not providing actually an option for, there's no trial equivalent.
For single unit dwellings. Okay. At this point, there's not, but there has been other areas. So we know a lot from what's happening in New South Wales and other states that have rolled out a service like that. But in Queensland at the moment, the message from the state at the moment is to push out green organics bins, and then in the future looking at the potential of food organics, given some regulatory developments that they have to look at in regards to PFAS and a range of other things about the processing of that material. So rolling out those green organics bins has had a huge impact on the amount of organics we're diverting from landfill already.
Okay, so a follow-up question. So I just needed that to kind of just get some clarity. There was the point made before that the reason why there's an interest here is not necessarily about the units today, but because of the increase of this type of dwelling, that we're going to have a much higher percentage of our population in this kind of dwelling. I'm wondering whether, given that we're reviewing the city plan, that this kind of impact should be made through a planning instrument rather than through, this kind of trial. Like, is there, out of this, do you come up with recommendations for planning to say, okay, in future, when you build towers, we want to see this kind of waste structure?
Through the chair, we, as part of the city plan work that's happening at the moment, we've got a waste team in there. One of the drivers that we have, obviously, is that it's not necessarily just about the food stream, but recycling stream per se. What we're finding is that we need a certain amount of space in these developments to ensure that we have enough space for bins, because you'll be aware in some of your divisions, some of the older buildings, we don't have even a yellow top bin because we physically don't have the space for that. We need to make provisions for the future to allow us to have that physical space, but also the access, because getting a truck in to collect these things is another challenge. The streets become tighter and these developments become denser as well. So in answer to your question, absolutely. These trials won't necessarily feed directly into that, but we do have a team saying we need that space for a multiple adequate space for all recycling and resource recovery that traditionally we may not have had. So that is being bundled up in that wider project.
Thank you. I'm perhaps more interested in that this is kind of a, if you want to, but it's kind of an after retrofit that we happen to have a bin there. I'm very interested in what we put in the city plan to make sure that this becomes an easy thing for people from that point, from when you're on your level and you open a drawer and everything goes into one lot. Are we going to allow that more? We had a different example in a planning committee recently, if you can indulge me, the one where we worked out we only needed so many car spaces and bike spaces for aged care 85 plus, but they're all around on their mobile scooters and we've got no allocation for that. So I think I see the value in this, but I'd be really interested in seeing what comes in terms of we've got an opportunity in the next 3 years on the city plan. So yeah, I know we're questions, but I just raise that.
Great points. Thanks, Councillor Patterson. I've got Councillor Wilkinson, then Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep mine brief if I can. So just in relation to the trials and the outcomes, so 7 buildings chose to participate. Can you give me an idea, though, of how many buildings were approached or a number across the city as far as what this could look like if it were to be rolled out in its entirety?
So through the Chair, we approached buildings within the area where we currently collect our commercial food organics service so that we could incorporate the collection as part of that. So it stayed in that Surfers Paradise Main Beach, Broad Beach area. So we sent out emails via through the body corporate groups that they had. We approach sort of champions within those body corporate groups, and we went directly to buildings to try and get them to participate. But as I mentioned, the general pushback was they were concerned around odour and vermin and the amenity of having a food organics bin in that location. There were many buildings that just didn't have the space, so even though we would go and see if they were able to participate, there was just no space to put that collection service in there. And also at the time, some of these buildings, we ran the trial from May through to October, but when we approached them around just after the election, and due to caretaker mode, we couldn't really do anything prior to that. And so a lot of them were concerned about the timing due to tourism and their high peak season, that kind of thing. So we managed to get those 7 buildings who were happy with that timing. The number that we approached, we were looking at around 20 plus to try and get that number to try and participate in the service.
Yeah. No worries, thank you. And through you again, Chair, just can I get some sort of indication at this stage around the costs of this trial as far as what it's cost us to actually undertake the trial, and also just some clarity perhaps around if we were to progress this further as a city, would this be funded through the commercial business unit, or was this something that is not considered necessarily to be a core element of the commercial business unit? Would it be something that would be perhaps done through another mechanism, perhaps?
Okay.
I can answer the second part. Tony, you may well answer the first one. So maybe if we start with the second part, yeah, this would I would suggest this would be funded by the commercialised business unit, given that we're diverting this stuff away from the red lidded bin. So I think it would be considered sort of core business as the green organics bin is. And Tony, that first part, please.
Through the chair, the cost of the service. So this service is a little bit different to the other, to the general waste and the recycling because of the provision of the caddies and the liners. So that certainly increased the cost compared to the other services. Additionally, this service had a higher collection frequency than, say, for example, recycling. So it was collected 3 times a week, and that was part of that amenity control to make sure we stayed on top of the odour and things like that. As far as cost, it was an expensive one, and I'm trying to recall the actual cost of it, but it was cost per tonne was very high because of the low participation and the low diversion. So the higher the participation, obviously the higher the diversion of material, and that will bring down the cost of that. And that is another reason why we'd like to trial an opt-out service to understand what kind of tonnage diversion we could get and what impact that would have on the cost of delivering this service.
Through the chair, just to add on to that, I think the takeaways for me as part of funding this is because of it's a more complex and regular service. It's got caddies, it's got customer engagement. It's far more expensive than your typical residual red lidded bin. And part of that is, I think, understanding these costs, even if there is an economies of scale, if we did decide to go large with this one, it does help inform us if the state government is, if they're looking, for example, I'm not suggesting they are for mandating this sort of thing, we'll at least have some good base knowledge to say this is, for example, please don't quote me, 4 times more expensive than that. But it is, by its very nature, far more expensive than the routine that we've got now with the red lid bin.
Through the chair, I can provide those figures. I just can't recall them at this time.
Through the chair, I'd welcome seeing it, but I appreciate Chris's commentary there as well, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I figured that was going to be the case. But yeah, any additional information, I certainly welcome.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you. Will the trial proceed without the state funding that you're expecting to be confirmed in April?
At this time, we're expecting that funding to come through. It's quite substantial, but whether we would progress without that funding, I'd have to leave that to Mairead and Chris to make that decision.
Through the chair, I'd speak with my EGM and others on this one, but my recommendation would be probably to pause. We've got enough information at the moment with an opt-in, which would help us, given the other priorities that we have, I think, as a commercialised business unit. This, in my recommendation, wouldn't be one of our great priorities, given we've already have some base numbers there.
Thank you, Chris. If it is to proceed without funding, I think we would welcome the costs to be shared, because that's obviously a city cost that we haven't, as far as I can tell, haven't provided a motion to move those costs. So couple more questions. Would you proceed with the trial in a location where you don't have support from the local councillor?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't think that's practical. I think with most of these things that involve our community, having our councillors supportive and seeing it's something sensitive and sensible and worthwhile doing, I just, that's not the way we proceed with these things, Councillor.
First time in a long time we agree, Chris. 2 more questions, Chair. So the first trial was opt-in, and it involved, as you outlined earlier, $250 and then a $500, or I think I got that the other way around, payments for the participation. Will those payments be available to the next trial, even though it's opt out as opposed to opt in?
Through the chair, we haven't started the planning to go into the details of that, but having looked at what the incentives did and that they didn't really work, it wouldn't seem logical to provide those incentives when it really didn't give us any particular results. It may be we could look at different kinds of incentives to try and assist people wanting to avoid them opting out of that service. But again, the whole point of that opt-out trial is to see if we can get people to actually stay in the trial without having to do these additional things that would add a cost if we were to roll this out at a greater scale.
Just to circle back, I do have another question, but to circle back on based on that answer, have you modelled the next trial on the basis of having those in place? Because you've got funding coming from the state. So is it, at the moment, I'm sounding from your answer, it's not included in the next trial, or is it? I mean, because I imagine you've got, if it's April, you're seeking funding commitment. I would imagine you'd have some sort of framework in place.
Through the chair. So the incentives weren't actually included. We haven't done that, but part of the funding and part of what we'll be using is community and engagement. There is a funding for that, and what that actually looks like is still to be determined with our external stakeholder management team to understand how we can best get that, keep those opt-out numbers up, keep those opt-out numbers very low.
The reason I'm asking about the payment, Chair, and I'm stuck on this for a second, but I do have one more question, is because part of the trial, I imagine, and therefore choosing a second location that you indicated earlier, is to diversify the demographic. I imagine part of best practice would be to keep conditions almost identical for both trials. So do you think not having a payment incentive as part of the trial number 2 might be, and in fact, a disincentive to participate, and therefore might not have purity of results? Or am I jumping at too many shadows and there's a second shadow I'm going to be jumping at in a second?
Through you, Madam Chair, it already is different because it's opt-out, not opt-in, and typically in behaviour change trials, opt-out is already an incentive in a way, because it tends to increase the amount of people participating. I think just back to your earlier point about no resolution for expenditure. So we have a Towards Zero Waste plan that was endorsed last year. All our behaviour change and resource recovery initiatives, such as this one, which is really a combined one, are part of that plan. And each budget cycle we bring forward the line items. It's a relatively small line item compared with the other big things that you see come through WWE in terms of cost. But yeah, just to give you that sense of this is where it's pegged to is the plan, and the budget cycle is how we go through with the budget.
Last question I have is based on the experience of since January. I've got a bit of concern about this in the fact that is the evolution of this to its conclusion that there will be a penalty or a bin tax as opposed to the incentives to try and change behaviour. Like, will the end of this be the city officers eventually coming to us and saying we need to instill a financial penalty to increase participation in this, given the examples that we've just been through since January about looking to modify behaviour through financial disincentive?
Through you, Madam Chair. The organics, food organics go to landfill at the moment, and that's where the levy is applied. By reducing what we send to landfill, it reduces the levy. This is to support our whole community in reducing that levy cost in total over time. So no, there is no additional cost to the community for us to deliver this at the moment, given that we're grant funded, and it's to support the community in reducing that waste to landfill.
So I appreciate that context in relation to the cost to deliver the program, but I was referring more to the behaviour change element that has been put forward as a reason for other changes that we've litigated through council around our waste to try and reduce landfill. So now I'm wondering if this is going to landfill and it's better not for it to go to landfill, is the end game to put a financial penalty on putting it in landfill.
Well, the levy already applies.
So you've saved the levy, but that also applies to what we're doing at the moment. So I guess what I'm seeking is there going to be, can you rule out ever looking to put a financial disincentive to not do food organics within the household?
We couldn't sit here and make that call right now, but the levy already does that. That is the purpose of the levy, the state levy, is to incentivise reducing waste to landfill, of which food organics is a contributor.
Through the chair, I'd maybe expand on that a little bit. Yes, the levy is the ultimate driver of or financial incentive to keep things out of landfill. If we were to go down that path, that would be coming through council. We don't have a plan to be bringing anything like that in front of you that I'm aware of, councillor. It's really about how do we divert, how do we encourage our customers. The only thing that is similar to that at the moment is potentially bin inspection programs, particularly in our green organics, because again we do pay a penalty as a city in terms of fees for processing that if it's contaminated, and if we are seeing gross contamination, we do write letters, so customers will get a notice if when the bin tips up and it's full of metal or garbage or whatever, the green bins, the customers will hear from us.
If there are no further questions, I will move the recommendation that the presentation be noted. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Councillor Young. So with that, I thank you so much for the presentation. It's been long awaited. Councillor Young, did you have a question?
Thanks, Tony. I just wanted to suggest that you might express our thanks to the manager of the Norfolk Apartments for participating and encouraging that participation from the residents.
Yeah, we've had to move this one along a couple of times, and I've been really eager to see it because I was fascinated by the food organics trial part to it, but it's actually been the study of the behavioural changes and what has and hasn't worked in supporting those changes that I've found and taken the most out of it. So I'm really grateful for the rigorous collection of data in that space as much as the actual food organics reclamation from landfill. So thank you very much for that. If nobody wants to speak against the recommendation, I'll thank the city officers for their work and for the presentation as my close. And with that, I'll take the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried. That brings us to a close of items for today's agenda. I will circle back because we left it a little open-ended with 6.1, which we have gained some clarity that will just remain as a lost vote and can be dealt with at full council. Item 7, there are no closed session or reports. Item 8, I'm not aware of any general business items unless any popped up as a result of today's agenda. Not looking like it. And with that, I'll thank you for your attendance and declare the meeting closed at 10:47 a.m.